Hey everybody, what's up? Today, we will take a look at Laravel Folio, which, at the time of this recording, was recently announced actually at Laracon 2023. It's pretty interesting. It's kind of funky, but in a very cool way. That's actually a compliment. All right, so let's have a look. All right, so first sentence. Laravel Folio is a powerful page-based router designed to simplify routing in Laravel applications. Okay, so with that one sentence, immediately your first thought might be, oh, great. So is this the new way of doing routing? Do I now have to update all of my older applications and switch it over to this new way of doing things? And the answer is absolutely not. The traditional way is not going anywhere. Trust me. This is a variation. It's a different way to handle routing that I think you'll find is optimal and targeted at a specific kind of application, not something gigantic, but instead things like, at least from the time I've spent with it, and that might change in the future. But so far, my instinct is things like personal websites, static sites, documentation, blogs, things of that nature. I think this will work actually incredibly well for those sorts of applications. Okay, no more talking. Let's just dig in and see what the fuss is about. All right, as always, let's begin from the command line. I'll create a new application. We'll cd, and then open that in my editor. All right, there we go. So imagine you wanted to build, an app to track your personal projects or something like that. All right, well, traditionally, right, you would go into your routes file and you would register a route like this. Declare it explicitly when I visit /projects, that should then load a view called projects, all right? All right, well, with Laravel Folio, it's a little bit different. So let's bring this back to the default. And now in my resources views directory, I'm just going to create a folder here, and we're going to call it pages. Now, this name is unique because Folio, once we install it, by the way, is going to look for this folder by default. Okay, so I said projects. So why don't we go ahead, at least initially, and create a simple file called projects.blade.php. And let's do something like my projects to get us going. Okay, so now I don't have to tell you this. If we try to access this page in the browser, it's not going to work because we haven't installed Folio. But still, let's see the before and after for fun. All right, here we are in my browser. Let's now try to access that endpoint. /projects, but of course we get a 404. All right, let's fix it. So back to the command line, I'm going to require Laravel Folio, and why don't we grab the beta? So again, at the time of this recording, on your machine, it'll probably be different. But as I record this, I'm going to grab 1.0 and the beta release. All right, and there we go. So now if I run PHP Artisan, there should be a new top-level Folio namespace. Here we go. And we have two commands here. Folio install, of course, installs Folio into your project. And then Folio list, you can think of as the equivalent of route list, but specifically for your Folio routes. They're kind of separate there. All right, let's run this. PHP Artisan Folio install. And with that, I think we're ready to go. So let's switch back to my browser. As a refresher, here's the page we were trying to load. And if I update it, now, like magic, it works. Kind of cool. So check this out. If I run PHP Artisan Folio list, and now we can see all of the Folio-specific routes in our project. Okay, so now at this point, you're probably thinking, all right, that's kind of cool, but I still don't get it. How do I deal with more complex things like nested routes or dynamic URIs or route model binding or authorization or middleware? How do I do this? And actually, as it turns out, they've thought of everything. So why don't we keep looking here? Now, first, if we have an endpoint to view all of our projects, then we probably also have an endpoint to view a specific project. So with that in mind, within my pages directory, why don't we add a new folder for projects? And then I'm going to move this top level one, which, we can usually think of as the index action, right? Well, with that in mind, why don't we rename this to index, index.blade.php. Okay, well now, Folio is still smart enough to recognize, all right, I see what's going on here. I know the conventions. The endpoint will still be /projects. So once again, if I load this, it works. And if I come back and we run our Folio list command again, it still works. But now you can see the path is new. Okay, cool. So that means within here, I can add a second endpoint, maybe for show. But this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Of course, right now, if I want to view a specific project, I'll just write specific project. Well, yeah, now the endpoint would be projects/show. Let's have a look. If I run our list command again, yeah, notice this is the exact URI I would have to use. All right, let's have a look. Projects/show, and now we're loading that page. But yeah, of course, how do I now distinguish between the project with an ID of 1 versus the project with an ID of 4? All right, well, this is where we can introduce parameters. And remember at the beginning of the video when I said it's a little bit funky? Well, that's probably going to be your first thought, but you know what? On second thought, when you get to your second thought, just ignore it. It's fine. Get used to it. It's there. It works. You don't need to worry about it. All right, I'll show you. So to demonstrate this, you know what? Why don't we quickly whip up a model for a project? PHP Artisan, make me a model for a project. And as part of that, why don't you also give me a migration, maybe a factory if we need it, and a seeder. All right, there we go. Okay, so very quickly, let's go to create projects table. And again, this is only an example, so we will be incredibly fast here. Maybe a project has a title, we could have a due date or things like that, details, members, but let's keep it very simple. Maybe it has a title and a body, and yeah, we can finish the rest later on our own time. Okay, cool. So now let's go into my environment file, and we're going to use SQLite here. And we can get rid of the rest of this and use the defaults. Okay, so let's touch database/database.sqlite and then migrate my database. Yeah, I'm going quickly here because you've seen this before and it's kind of irrelevant to the video. All right, so now last little step, let's go to Project Factory and we'll say title will be a fake sentence and the body of the project, again, can be a fake paragraph. And that should be enough to get us started. Cool. All right, so let's go ahead and run this, and we'll say app, models, project, and I would like, 25 random projects persisted to the database. All right, so now we can test this out in the browser with actual dynamic data, and that should be helpful. All right, so if I come down to projects/show, yeah, this is the slightly funky part that might take a moment or two to get used to. I'm going to rename this initially to bracket id.blade.php. Think of it as a parameter, a wildcard, whatever fits your head. Okay, so now with that change alone, if I come back and we run PHP Artisan Folio list, you'll notice that now, yeah, this is a little more familiar, very similar to how you would define it within your route/web file. All right, let's see. We will go to projects/10 this time, and it still loads that page. Even if it's, 500, it's still going to work. Okay, so now how do I get that parameter? Well, very simple. It'll be passed through. ID. And notice the name of the variable matches up with that parameter or that wildcard. So again, come back, give it a refresh, and now we get 500, 2, 5. You get the idea. Okay, so next, how do I allow for things like route model binding? I get a lot of use out of that, and I'd love to continue using it even if I'm reaching for Laravel Folio. Again, no problem at all. It's actually the same process. I'm going to update this to be my key. If it helps, I can make it capital like a class name, but you don't need to, just like you would do it within a traditional routes file. Okay, so now I said a project has a title and a body, right? So we could do something like this. Let's see if it works. Come back to the browser. Let's go to the project with an ID of 1. And sure enough, we have our dummy title. And just to show you a few variations, it's all working seamlessly. So cool. Okay, so now if I were to come back, I could do something like this, project, and then within here, we could have our project's body. And yeah, that'll be fine. So come back, here's that project with an ID of 4, project with an ID of 1, it just works. And now if you're thinking about any of those edge cases where like, what if the key is different and the way you resolve it is unique, all of these things have been handled. I'm not going to cover every use case, but check the documentation and they will show you how to update the file name to account for these things. And yeah, again, I get it. It feels kind of weird to update a file to configure things like that. But remember, this is an optional package. It's a choice. And you know what? You get used to it really quick. So give it a shot before you judge it. Okay, so anyways, let's discuss a few more things before we wrap up. Now, as part of that Folio install command, you should now have a Folio service provider file within your app providers directory. And notice within the boot method here, we have the option of adding group middleware to any set of files. So in this case, if I want to add, just as an example, how about HTTP middleware? Why don't we authenticate all of these routes? This wouldn't make sense, but just for an example. If I want to run that, now it's going to apply this middleware to every single Folio endpoint, Folio generated endpoint. All right, so let's come back. And now, you know what? It's probably, it's actually working, but it's trying to redirect us to a login route. And of course, this is a fresh application. I don't have one, but it is in fact working, and that's great. However, aside from this, and of course, you can configure this however you want. So if you wanted to say only within project/star do I want to apply a set of middleware, you can do that. Okay. Alternatively, you can apply it on the page level. So if I come back here, what I can do is at the very top within PHP tags, I can import the middleware function from that Laravel Folio package. Okay, so now I can do the exact same thing. I can pass my middleware keys like auth or guest or whatever custom ones you've created. Okay, so now if I come back to the browser, give it a refresh, we're still going to get the exact same thing. And just to prove it to you, if I comment that out, you can see we are loading the page. Cool. Okay, but next, I'm now thinking, all right, middleware, I got that, but what about simple things like authorization? How do I know if you are authorized to access this endpoint? Well, again, the exact same process. And in this example, I will use Laravel's PHP Blade directive. Okay, so I will say this is one area where I think it might be a little overly confusing. So in the context of Folio, there is a distinction between traditional PHP tags and using the Blade directive. So as I understand it, we want to use the traditional PHP tags for Folio-specific hooks, like middleware and things like that. For anything else, you can use the PHP Blade directive. And I assume that's related to when Blade is loaded and introduced or something like that. Okay. Anyways, again, things we can get used to pretty quickly. All right, so if I want to authorize that the user has access to this project, the general flow behind the scenes is going to be the same. For example, why don't we make a policy for a project? So we will call it project policy, and the model, of course, is project. All right, let's open that up. It's in our app policies directory as usual. And yeah, why don't we do, how about this one here, view. Can the currently authenticated user view this project? And at least to start, why don't we just hard code it? We can say return true. Yes, you can. All right, let's use it now within our page. So we can say gates, pull that in. And to start, why don't we just authorize that you can view the current project that was injected through route model binding. All right, so if we did everything correctly, this should actually think about it. What do you think will happen when we load this in the browser? Our policy returns true. However, we're not currently signed in. So I think we will get a unauthorized 403. And sure enough, we do. So again, comment it out, the page loads, uncomment, it fails. Okay, but now if we were to either make this optional, so I can say allow guest users to hit this authorization logic. Well, now if I come back and give it a refresh, it does in fact work. But yeah, otherwise, if we want to test this out, why don't we do it right up here? I don't have an authentication system, so I will just say log in using ID. Log in the user with an ID of 1. And then we're going to determine whether or not that user has access to this project. And the policy, of course, just says, yep, anyone can come through these doors. So it should, in fact, work. Oh, it doesn't work. Why is that? It doesn't work because, think quickly, Jeffrey, because I don't have any users, of course. So let's do this. Let's go into our database, Cedar, and we have these example user accounts. Yeah, sorry about that. Let's seed our database, and that will create 10 dummy users. Okay, so now when I run this code, it actually has a user with an ID of 1 that it can log in. All right, cross your fingers. Hopefully that fixes the problem. We come back, we give it a refresh, and sure enough, it works. Okay, cool. So yeah, now at this point, we can make our policy dynamic, and maybe we can do something like, let's see, we don't have any relationship between a project and a user. Let's do this. Project factory, and we'll say a project belongs to a user. So that will be user factory. We're kind of getting away from the core material here, but if you want to skip ahead a minute, that's fine, even 30 seconds. Yep, and that should do it. And then back to database Cedar. And why don't we just do everything here? And actually, in the process, project will create users, so I can just stick with this. All right, and then finally, update the migration, and we should be off to the races. So what, unsigned big integer or foreign ID, whatever you want to do. All right, here we go. PHP Artisan, migrate, fresh, seed it, and we should be all set. Okay, cool. So now in my policy, I can say, well, let me know if the project user is the currently authenticated user. And of course, if we want that relationship, we should just go ahead and whip it up. All right, so the relationship is user, and there we go. The Laravel IDEA plugin for PHP Storm can build that for me automatically. And I think we're all set here. All right, so let's give it a shot. Back to the browser. So if we give this a refresh, it should work, and it does because the project with an ID of 1 was created by the user with an ID of 1, so it matches. But if we try to do a different project that was not created by the current user, sure enough, we get a 403 unauthorized. And of course, you can handle that however you want. So if we come back here, yeah, you could even swap this out for if gate denies access to show to view the corresponding project, then abort to respond in any way that you want to. It all works. So yeah, anything that you would normally do within a controller can just go at the top of the file. And again, yeah, we're coming full circle back to the old days. And I've been doing this long enough to see that cycle happen over and over. And once you see that loop, I'll tell you what, you just learn not to have strong opinions because so often these things just kind of end up as trends. What is recommended becomes an anti-pattern, and then it comes full circle back to being recommended or at least appreciated the next time it wraps around. So yeah, to wrap up, let's say a user has many projects. So let's create that very quickly. And there we go. If I want to access those projects, just like I would do in a controller, here's your user. And of course, I don't have to tell you this, but if you're expecting an authenticated user, then of course, make sure you add the corresponding middleware. Either do it in the page as we demonstrated, or apply it globally within your service provider for Folio. So now if I want to grab, for example, the user's projects, it's the same process. So why don't we wrap up with that? We'll say something like, for each user projects as project, why don't we just do a simple list item here, project title. All right, come back to the browser, give it a refresh, and it looks like, yeah, of course, any user in this example only has a single project. But of course, the point is, it works. All right, so yeah, I think that mostly covers the bullet points. And of course, if you're still curious, have a look at the documentation. But here's the point. Clearly, this is not intended for every sort and every type of application. I think it really shines for smaller things like, again, your personal website, a documentation, a blog, situations where that cycle, that traditional MVC cycle of create a route, create a controller, route to the controller gathers the data, it loads the view accepts the data and renders the template and then returns the response. That can be a little overly verbose when you're building a 2-page documentation site or something like that. So again, in those situations, I think Folio really shines. And then even further, if you want to combine this with something like Laravel Vault, then it gets even cooler. And we'll discuss that in a future Larabit. Thanks for watching.